482. Pow. Very well. I prefer complete histories. But tell me how you made his acquaintance. Did anyone introduce you to him? No. It was he who introduced himself to us. When? Last night, after we left you. Through what medium? The very prosaic one of our landlord. He is staying, then, at the Hôtel de Londres with you. Not only in the same hotel, but on the same floor. What is his name? For, of course, you know. The Count of Monte Cristo. That is not a family name. No. It is the name of the island he has purchased. And he is a count. A Tuscan count. Well, we must put up with that, said the Countess, who was herself from one of the oldest Venetian families. What sort of man is he? Asked the Vicomte de Morcerf. You hear, Monsieur de Morcerf, I am referred to you, said the Countess. We should be very hard to please, madam, returned Albert, did we not think him delightful. A friend of 10 years' standing could not have done more for us, or with a more perfect courtesy. Come, observed the Countess, smiling. I see my vampire is only some millionaire who has taken the appearance of Lara in order to avoid being confounded with Monsieur de Rothschild. And have you seen her? Her? The beautiful Greek of yesterday. No, we heard, I think, the sound of her guzla, but she remained perfectly invisible. When you say invisible, interrupted Albert, it is only to keep up the mystery. For whom do you take the blue domino at the window with the white curtains? Where was this window with the white hangings? Asked the Countess. At the Rospoli Palace. The Count had 3 windows at the Rospoli Palace? Yes. Did you pass through the Corso? Yes. Wow, it took only a year, almost and a half, a year and 5 months, to get to a passage made up entirely just of dialogue. No action is happening here, and I actually find dialogue passages to be a bit more easy to comment on because there's information being shared between characters. You learn about dynamics, you learn about motivations. Let's try to pull some of this apart here. I don't remember if we mentioned yesterday, but Countess G still thinking that Dante is a vampire. Love that. I don't even care if she's being literal about that or just having her little fun and games. But one of the things that I find kind of interesting here is so much of the story so far with Franz has been him acquiring information and kind of invisibly scrutinizing Dante without having a sounding board. He's been kind of alone with his thoughts. And so this is one of the first instances where, even compared to the last opera scene where we spent time with Countess G, this is one of the first times when he's able to answer questions about Dante to somebody else. And he's being a little coy here. I asked yesterday whether or not he was flirting with the Countess. It doesn't have to be. But he's not giving out more information than is being asked of him. Not really. And we don't really get a reaction out of the Countess for what she's learning about the Count. But this turn here where Franz is answering all these questions about Dante, the second that the Countess asks, what sort of man is he? Franz basically says, well, ask Albert, what does he think? Did we not think him delightful? Albert basically saying here that he's done so much for us, how could you not but love him? Which reveals something more about Albert's character in this moment than it does Franz or the Countess or Dante, because Franz almost seems like he is purposefully avoiding having to remark on Dante's character because he doesn't think much of him, whereas Albert seems like he's speaking to his kind of superficiality, his vainness. Like, he's done so much for us, why would we ever think ill of him? And not factoring in that kind of dark philosophy that Dante has spewed about executions and death and separating one's soul from their body, putting that aside and just being like, but we got a carriage out of it, so why would I say anything bad about him? Then there's the last kind of back and forth, and I don't know how much importance to place on this, but the Countess is asking about the Greek woman that was at the opera with Dante before, and there's this idea, and I haven't commented upon it in the show because it hasn't felt important, but maybe it is. This idea of the blue domino at the window with the white curtains. The blue domino clearly is a costume that someone was wearing. It's been mentioned before when they were passing by the Rospoli Palace. And maybe it's starting to indicate that there was a person in Dante's window either with him or awaiting him, and the idea that it might be the Greek woman feels like a misdirect. Like, whoever this blue domino is might end up being someone we might not expect. Is it Morel? Is it Jacopo? I don't know. I don't have the answers. I haven't read this before. You should know that by now. Let's continue with, since we got a few minutes, I'm not going to go deep in this today. I thought we could just talk a little bit about this every couple of days, talking about abridgments. So we talked about the reasons why abridgments exist yesterday. Let's talk a little bit about what usually gets cut in abridgments. What are the most common casualties? Here's just a list of things I found, and we can maybe pull these apart and talk about them. But if there's like a extensive scenic setup, secondary subplots that might not have a deep effect on the main narrative, sometimes explanatory backstory. I'm going to grab my abridgment and see if that long Luigi Vampa story is in there. Sometimes conversations that are overly long will be cut down, especially if they're kind of over-explaining motives of characters. If we're talking about the reasons why abridgments exist and touching on the cultural filtering that we discussed, the idea of trimming down some areas that have cultural references that might not be super familiar to other cultures, or even later readers. You know, we are reading kind of an old book here. If you're abridging this, you might cut out something that just no longer makes sense without having to do historical research, but luckily, that's why you got me. And then, of course, as we talked about yesterday, editing out morally or sexually delicate material, sometimes narrative echoes, where a novel might repeat itself or reframe something, will be trimmed out if it feels redundant. But sometimes, and I found this kind of interesting, is when you do cut something from an abridgment, and this touches a bit on that publisher idea I talked about yesterday, rather than it being ideological, there's this idea that over time, a classic book has earned a certain reputation for something. And so if you're doing an abridgment for it for a modern reader, you might edit that book down to feel more like its reputation. Like, this is what this book is supposed to be, even if the unabridged version complicates that. And I think that that's probably true for translations as well. So to give you an example, like if an editor thought that the Count of Monte Cristo is basically a revenge thriller, then everything, like all of the travel writing stuff we've dealt with in the last chapter, maybe social comedy, or the extensive sequence of Franz's drug trip. Maybe genealogy might be cut out. Maybe that's more for like the Odyssey. Stuff like that might be removed in order to make the book feel more like its reputation. That, to me, feels a little dangerous. I know I've talked about the Phantom of the Opera so much on this show and other shows. You can go read a whole article about this very topic here, and it's not about abridgments so much as different adaptations of it, but it's how you can go. This is a slippery slope where you can go from a very kind of chaotic investigative monster novel like Gaston Leroux's, original work, and over time it becomes a dark romance where you transform a monster into a romantic lead. Because, and this is would be an interesting case study, after Andrew Lloyd Webber's musical, did abridgments of Phantom of the Opera, the book, become more romantic focused rather than shock and horror? I don't know. I don't have the answer to that. That's something I'd like to know. But that would be, if it was, that would be an example of trimming something to make it feel more like it's supposed to be, and I'm putting those in scare quotes. Okay, that's all I've got for today. Join me here tomorrow. I've got so much more abridgment talk that we can go into at some point. So we'll see if it's tomorrow. Until then, okay, bye. The Countdown of Monte Cristo is part of the Gruntwork Podcast Network. This show is produced, edited, and hosted by Landon Solano. The original text of The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Theme song by Magic Solo. If you want to support the show and others like it, visit patreon.com/gruntworkpod. Thank you for listening. See you tomorrow.